All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary, where I'm at right now. Today is August 2nd, 2025, about 5:20 p.m., and we are continuing our reading of our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 14 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist. A very long, a very dense, a very thorough book written by Harry Haywood Hall, a black man who lived in the past century, who I believe wholeheartedly was me in a past lifetime. There are so many overlapping things that I've noticed while reading his fabulous story. And this is a very rare book that's hard to find. You can get it on libcom.org for free by just scrolling down and clicking this link right here. Also, just type in Black Bolshevik into Google PDF, and this book is very easy to find and not that hard to get. Acti is up in the chats. Acti says, hey, yo, shout out to Acti, my beautiful wife. She's out here supporting. Much love to her. And everybody else is going to join this live stream, man. We're going to keep it real. We're going to keep it raw. And we're going to actually continue to read this book, page by page, layer by layer. It's over 700 pages long, and we're on page about 311. Now, you can get this book on Amazon. Like I mentioned, it's a very rare book. The price keeps going up. It's a hardcover, which is probably, enough to pay your rent or somebody's rent. It's about close to $700 if you want to get it hardcover, but about $50 in paperback if you want to get this for your library, which I encourage all of you to get. Anyway, in our last reading of this text, we were finishing chapter 11, where he was talking about the Love Stone affair that was happening in the CPSU, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and also the CPUSA. Basically, Harry Haywood, in his telling of the story, the CPUSA and the CPSU were under threat by right-wing communists who wanted to differentiate and revise Marxism to fit their worldview, and they were defeated by the committees and the communists who voted against that. So Harry Haywood makes a very strong stance throughout this text against revisionism and changing orthodox Marxism. And we were actually getting into one of the more interesting parts of this book, his relationship with his wife, Ina. We have not heard from his wife, Ina, his second wife, his Russian wife, since page, I think, 120. And then when we were about to get into, his relationship with Ina, the pages in the book suddenly disappeared. We had a mix-up with our past PDF. You can see that at the end of our previous reading. I was very frustrated, but I was able to get a copy of the book with the missing pages in. So we're going to be reading the section on his wife Ina, which closes the Love Stone chapter 11, and we will be completing chapter 12 today. So this is going to be a long live stream. Get a drink, get a snack, get something to rest on, to sit down on, and enjoy the show as we continue reading here, Black Bolshevik. So, without further ado, let's go into Return from the Crimea. This is page 310. I returned to Moscow a few days before the school opened in order to spend some time with Ina. From her, I learned that a young Russian woman who worked in the chancellor's office at Kutva had returned from vacation in the Crimea and was spreading malicious slander about me, portraying me as an insatiable womanizer. The woman was known among the Kutva students as a scandal monger, and my friends there paid no attention. But Ina was afraid the rumors would cause me some harm in other quarters. I remembered having seen the woman in question at the rest home. I had greeted her, but paid her no more attention. Perhaps that was just the trouble. I can't believe this woman was out here spreading lies, lying on this man's dick, lying on his dick. As I entered the Lenin School building a few days later, I ran into Kursanova. She greeted me with a curt nod and a limp hand. I want to have a talk with you, Comrade Hayward. She said. Why, certainly, Comrade Kursanova. When? In a few minutes, when I get back to the office. I suspected then that the slander campaign had reached the school, and a moment later, my suspicions were shockingly confirmed. Further along the hall, I saw a group of my fellow students looking at the wall newspaper and laughing. On seeing me, one of them said, "Hey, why, there's Harry himself." Greeting them, I turned to see the cause for their merriment. There it was, a cartoon captioned, "Comrade Haywood doing practical work in a Crimean rest home." The cartoon portrayed me surrounded by a dozen or so pretty Russian girls. It was expertly drawn, I suspected by a professional artist. Okay, that's just wild. That's wild. That's crazy. I saw nothing funny about it. Furiously, I demanded, "Who in hell put that up?" My friends disclaimed any knowledge of who had drawn it or how it had gotten there. Someone, I believe it was Springy, said, "Calm down, Harry. You're taking it too seriously. It's only a cartoon." "It's slander," I retorted, and immediately headed for Kursanova's office. "Ah, Comrade Haywood, you saw the cartoon." "Yes," I said, "I saw it, and it's slander." Is it now? Or is it simply criticism by some of your fellow students? How about a little self-criticism? How can it be honest criticism when no one will admit drawing it and placing it on the board? I replied. "You were at a rest home," she asked. "How did you get there when you were supposed to be doing practical work?" "I was sent there by the party secretary in Sevastopol. He saw the letter from the school and knew what I was supposed to do," I replied. "He probably wanted to get rid of you," she pointed out. I told her I saw no reason why practical work could not be combined with leisure, and added that my comrades had said the rumor had been started there by a known scandal monger. This cartoon, I contended, was just an echo of that malicious campaign. "Regardless, you shouldn't have allowed yourself to get caught in such a situation," she observed. Is this Russian logic? Is this Soviet logic? I wasn't cheating on my wife in the Crimea. I was out there chilling at a rest home, minding my own business. And the Russian replies, "Well, you shouldn't have gotten yourself in this situation. Look at you. Look at what you did to yourself." I simmered down and we parted on a friendly note, but the source of the cartoon remained a mystery. As I remember, I protested the incident to Maurice Childs, the party secretary of the English-speaking sector and its representative to the school bureau. I didn't see how the cartoon could have been posted without his knowledge, but he brushed the matter aside. The following day, however, the picture was removed. I believe it was Childs who told me that the artist was a young Mexican in the Spanish language section of the school. I remembered 2 Mexican comrades had entered the school some months before, but like most of the students, they were using pseudonyms. But this was not the end of the story. A few days after the wall cartoon incident, I ran into Mary Houston, a black Kutva student from the U.S. Mary had a grudge against me for taking sides against her in some of her personal disputes with other students at Kutva. Apparently, her grudges were many and extended to most of her fellow students. We exchanged cool formal greetings, and as I was about to pass on, she lashed out, "Hey man, I've been hearing all about your carryings on in the Crimea. That's pretty bad stuff. What you trying to do, scandalize our name?" she demanded. "By the way, when you gonna be cleansed? I'm sure gonna be there," she gloated. She was referring to the party cleansing, Chishka, which was taking place that fall throughout the Soviet Union. I didn't take Mary's threat lightly. A few days before, during the cleansings at Kutva, she hurled a series of violent and false charges at Patterson and Maud White. They were kept on the stand for hours attempting to refute them. In Patterson's case, his cleansing had taken up one whole evening and was extended to the next. William Weinstone, then official party representative to the Comintern, and also a member of the International Control Commission, finally interceded to get Pat off the hook. A curious thing about all this was that, to my knowledge, Mary was never called to account for her slanderous accusations. Okay, this is just very high schoolish. Very high schoolish, which I'm not surprised. All of these are very young people in their 20s and maybe even their late 20s and early 30s, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of like backbiting going on. The day of the party cleansings at the Lenin School finally arrived. The entire collective, including the rector, the scrub woman, maintenance personnel, faculty, clerical workers, and the entire student body gathered in the school auditorium. The chairman of our cleansing committee was none other than the famous old Bolshevik Felix Kohn, member of the Central Control Commission of the CPSU. He had been a member of one of the first Marxist groups in Russia and a friend of Lenin, a person with an unchallengeable record. He was a thin, elderly man, stern-looking with a shaggy goatee and flashing eyes under bristling eyebrows. He impressed me as a strict disciplinarian. He opened the meeting, called attention to the solemnity of the occasion, and then outlined the task, purpose, and the procedure to be followed. It was a process of purification, he said, designed to purge from our ranks all noxious elements, factional troublemakers, and self-seeking careerists which a party in power inevitably attracts to it. Party members were to be examined on the basis of both their individual work assignments and their political commitment as members of the CPSU. In other words, it was to be a scrutiny of both conduct and conviction. All present, whether party or non-party, had the duty to come forth if they had criticisms or charges against any party member. Indeed, it was permissible for people outside the school, anyone who had a complaint against any party member, to participate. The party member on the stand was required to give an autobiography, when, how, and why he or she joined the party, and what he or she was doing to merit renewing their membership. In a stern voice, eyes flashing, Cohn warned, "Woe betide anyone who makes false statements or attempts to in any way deceive this commission." He then listed the penalties which could be given to party members for various infractions. First, there was a reprimand for minor offenses, a censure for more grave ones, then strict censure with a warning, and expulsion as a last resort. We all sat tensely as the secretary of the commission began to call students to the stand. The commission had 5 members sent by the party from outside the school. Each party member, upon taking the stand, was required to turn his or her membership card over to the commission, to be returned only if the commission felt that he or she had answered all questions to its satisfaction. In other words, the commission decided whether you retain the right to remain in the party. Okay, I'm not going to lie, this sounds a bit cultish. I understand the idea of trying to, get rid of bad elements and actors and settling disputes and stuff like that, but calling it cleansing is a bit, it sounds like, Jonestownish, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds very, reminds me of like The Highest and Tyler Perry's Ruthless, making certain members do things to prove their loyalty to him. I don't know if this is still practiced in communist parties around the world. I don't know how long this lasted in the Soviet Union, but it's a very fascinating practice, to say the least. Eventually, my turn came. I must admit I was rather nervous. I took the stand and sketched my background and party experiences, what I got out of study at the school, what I intended to do when I returned home. No one rose to criticize me. And to my great relief, Mary didn't even show up. In fact, Kursanova commended me as a good student and spoke favorably about my studies on the national question. The cleansing continued for several exciting days, but no serious infraction of party discipline or lack of party loyalty was found among our English-speaking group. The cleansing, however, was a more serious matter among students from underground parties in fascist or semi-fascist countries. As I remember, a police agent was flushed out in the Polish group. Very interesting, fascinating. But who had drawn that cartoon? This mystery was not to be cleared up until 40 years later. Although I had always had some faint suspicion as to the artist's identity, I attended a birthday party for the world-renowned Mexican muralist Davido Siqueiros. As a result of an international protest movement, he had just been released from prison where he and other revolutionaries had been incarcerated, charged with leading and fomenting the National Railway Strike of 1959. It was a festive occasion in typical Mexican style, complete with fireworks and around-the-clock open house. Hundreds of comrades, friends, and neighbors gathered to congratulate the great artist. As I was introduced to him by a friend, a thought suddenly occurred to me. He had not been a student at the Lenin School in 1929, I asked. Yes, he responded, looking at me curiously. Yes, I was there. Were you the one who drew a cartoon for the school wall newspaper titled Comrade Haywood Doing Practical Work in Crimean Rest Home? His eyes lit up with a gleam of recognition. Yeah, that was me. Well, I said, I'm that Harry Haywood. We both burst out laughing, and he proceeded to tell the others around us the whole story. Who was the other young Mexican with you at the school, I asked. Oh, that was Encina. Encina was the general secretary of the Mexican Communist Party. He's still in jail, Siqueiros added sadly. Okay, I would have fought him. I would have knocked him out. You got to get good licks in. I know it's comradely to just laugh about it. Plus, nobody died in this situation. But we got to fight. We got to fight. You were trying to slander my name. You know what I mean? And plus, I'm a black man in Russia, and you're spreading propaganda about my dick in this foreign country. That's crazy. I would have at least got a few licks in. because that's a wild thing to do to somebody. You know what I mean? And I understand it's just schoolyard jokes and stuff like that, but bro, I'm married and I'm a grown-ass man. And secondly, why isn't he talking about Ina? I got really upset and mad that there was no story about Ina. What was their relationship like? Once again, I know this is a political biography, a political autobiography, but I want some juicy details, man. I want some juicy details. It makes me think that maybe he didn't really love Ina. I don't know. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go. Sorry. I think I skipped a chapter. Okay, I skipped a chapter. My last year in the Soviet Union is actually what we're reading. For some reason, the book skipped a chapter. So we're actually going to go my last year in the Soviet Union. Okay, that's what we're reading today. Chapter 11, not chapter 12. Apologies. I swear to God, when I checked the text to, organize what the live stream will be today, I thought we were going to be on chapter 12. I apologize. Anyway, chapter 11, my last year in the Soviet Union. So, following Lovestone's expulsion from the party in June of 1929, Nasonov and I continued our work in the Negro Commission of the Comintern. We both loved the work, which involved a continuous check on the press of the U.S. Party, then the Daily Worker and the Communist, the minutes and resolutions of the party's leading committees, and other labor and progressive publications in which party members were active. This included Labor Unity, the organ of the TUUL, and Labor Defender, which was put out by the International Labor Defense League. This material was to be found in the Comintern Information Department, whose American representatives at the time, as I remember, was A.G. Boss. As I acquainted myself with the material, I became pleased and excited at the advances the party had made in work among blacks. The U.S., it seemed, had entered the third period with a bang. A rapid decline of the economy and growth of mass unemployment. Most impressive was the widespread resistance of workers to rationalization, wage cutting, stretch out, and speed up, and the anti-union terror campaign of employers backed by the federal, state, and local governments. The resistance was reflected in the needle trades, mining, automobile, and textile industries. All this was 2 months before the October 1929 stock market crash and the onset of the economic crisis, which was to embrace the whole capitalist world. The party, now freed from factionalism, had united on the basis of the Comintern Address and was vigorously moving forth to organize and lead the mounting struggles of the workers. Nasonov and I felt the best evaluation of the party's work among blacks was put forward by Cyril Briggs in a series of articles which appeared in the June, July, and September 1929 issues of The Communist. Briggs characterized the Sixth Congress of the CI as a major turning point for the party in carrying out revolutionary program in Afro-American work. Using the struggle against white chauvinism as a barometer of the effectiveness of the party's work in this area, he pointed out that prior to the Sixth Congress, white chauvinism in the American Party, in both factions, unmasked at that Congress by Comrade Ford and mercilessly condemned by that supreme revolutionary body, made progress in Negro work well nigh impossible. Before the Sixth Congress, there were only a handful of blacks in the party, but since then, the Central Committee had set up a national Negro department to help in the formulation of policies and in the direction of the work nationally. District and section Negro committees were formed in most areas of party concentration. At the Sixth Party Convention, black comrades were elected to the highest body in the party, the Central Committee, and to the National Executive Committee of the Young Communist League. They were also elected to the party's Politburo, the National Bureau of the League, and added to district committees and section committees. Another step forward was registered at the founding convention of the TUUL in September 1929. Of the 800 plus delegates, 68 were black. So it seems like the party is actually making progress towards, bringing more black people into the party and making it more diverse. So this is a good thing. Nevertheless, this was only a beginning. White chauvinism was still pervasive and represented a powerful influence in the party. Briggs then turned a critical spotlight on the most dramatic struggle of the period, the strike of Southern textile workers at Gastonia, North Carolina, which took place in the spring of 1929. This strike, led by the party and the National Textile Workers Union, an affiliate of the TUEL, was the party's first mass activity in the South. It was therefore a test for the new line on the unions and on the Afro-American question. The Southern textile industry, and Gastonia's mills were no exception, was traditionally a white industry with blacks about 5% of the workforce. The whites were new proletarians from the mountains and farms, employed by northern mill owners who had moved their mills south to exploit the cheap and unorganized labor of the region. This is also a big problem in the South to this day, because in general, many of these southern states don't have unions. In fact, they actively work against unionizing the workers in states like Louisiana, Texas, Florida especially, Georgia as well. You find most of the unions in the northern states. Anyway, in Gastonia, these workers responded to their exploitation by striking against stretch-out and starvation conditions. The bosses used the old battle cry of white supremacy to divide the blacks and white workers and to try to break the strike. It created an atmosphere of reeking race hatreds and suspicion, and this was the state of things when the National Textile Workers Union launched its organizing campaign in Gastonia. The mill owners and their local myrmidons, the sheriff, police, militia, foremen, managers, and extra legal arms of the KKK, sought to maintain the status quo threatened by the strikers. The strike speedily took on a political character, reaching the point of armed conflict, okay? Now, this is class antagonism. This is class warfare. This is what the party should be doing today, organizing strikes and letting all hell break loose. Anyway, the heroic woman strike leader, Ella Mae Wiggins, was pursued and shot down in broad daylight. Damn. The Gastonian chief of police was killed and several deputies wounded when they attacked the 10th colony, which strikers had formed after being evicted from their company-owned homes. 16 strike leaders, including some communists, stood trial for the murder of the police chief. The reign of terror that ensued made the situation extremely difficult for our organizers. Clearly, there could be no retreat from the principle of organizing blacks and whites into one union on the basis of complete equality. Yet there were some union and party leaders who wanted to back down in the face of the prevailing chauvinism among the white workers. Basically saying, the communist leaders, they were saying, listen, yeah, we want to organize the workers, we want them to go on strike, we want to antagonize the situation, but we're going to let the white workers be racist against the black workers. We have a chance here to make this strike into something bigger, to have the workers actually seize the means of production in this mill, but we're going to let the white workers be racist against the black workers and not unionize with them. You get what I'm saying? So this is a very touchy moment. This is a touchy, testy moment. The Central Committee firmly laid down the line against such a retreat. Following the line of the ECCI resolution, it insisted that the new union embrace all nationalities and colors, and that separate unions for blacks were to be organized only in those trades from which they were barred by the reactionary policies of the white union leaders. After their initial wavering, the local leadership rallied to the correct line. Blacks and whites were organized into the same union. Bravo. Bravo, bravo, bravo. There was a chance to fuck up right there. There was a chance to fuck up right there. But we're never going to let, racism be an excuse as to why we're not going to organize, unionize, and collectivize to fight for what is right. You get what I'm saying? So, beautiful thing right there. Love it. Testimony to this is a dramatic incident involving my brother, Otto. I hadn't heard much of Otto since he'd returned to the United States, only that he'd been placed on the Central Committee at the 6th Convention and was working in the Negro Department of the TUUL. As TUUL organizer, he had been sent to Gastonia. He was at nearby Bessemer City at the time of the attack on the strikers' 10th colony and the shooting of the police chief. Otto was unaware of what had happened and that the stage had been set for his lynching should he return. Damn. As an article in the Daily Worker described the incident, Otto Hall was on his way to Gastonia on the night of the raid. The white workers, realizing the grave danger to which Hall was exposed if he happened to get into Gastonia that night, formed a bodyguard and went to meet Hall and warned him to keep away. They met Hall 2 miles out of town and took him in a motor car to Charlotte, where they collected enough money among themselves to pay his railroad fare to New York. No sooner had Hall embarked on the train, a mob broke into the house where he had hid before his departure. It was only timely action on the part of these white workers that saved the life of their Negro comrade. Once again, an incredible story, man. An incredible story. Then these are the parts of the books that I find the most fascinating and interesting. Not the political machinations and the, voting on committees and parties and stuff like that. It's actually like party work, organizing the strikes and the tidbits of information of where Otto and Harry were close to death. These are fascinating historical moments that I find the most captivating in this lovely book. Let me make sure my lighting is right. Let me turn this light on right here. All right, got it. Now y'all can see me a bit better. All right, now, much better. Let's continue, though. So the Gastonia struggle signaled a new period in the party's trade union work, a period which characterized the 30s overall. Under the leadership of the Communist Party and our left trade unions, black and white workers were organized into the same unions on the basis of equality and in the common fight against the capitalists. The party was able to mobilize mass support for the strike, and the 16 leaders framed for murder in cities throughout the South and the country as a whole. Otto personally spoke in some 27 cities. But what was to be said about the Needles Trade Union, long a bastion of the left? Briggs pointed out the criminal apathy of the comrades working in the area. The Needles Trades Industrial Workers Union only organized blacks in times of strike, and, as a result, had very few black members, while the union had special departments and scores of functionaries for Greek, Italian, Jewish, and other immigrant workers. There was no Afro-American department and not a single black functionary. This at a time when in New York alone there were several thousand black needle trade workers. Comrades in the Miners Union made a similar underestimation of work among Afro-Americans. This union operated in an industry which had a large number of black miners, in some fields even outnumbering the white workers, but had not yet appointed a single black organizer. In Illinois District 8, my old district, there occurred a particularly blatant case of white chauvinism. William Cruz, the district organizer, refused to share the pool of funds available for wages with Comrade Isabel, the black functionary. He persisted in this practice despite the demands of the National Secretariat that the funds be shared equitably. So here he's giving an example of a racist communist leader, William Cruz, whose name will now be remembered in history as a racist asshole. They had enough money to actually pay themselves, and he refused to share the money with a black woman who was also a leader in the Communist Party in Illinois. An example that, once again, just because somebody is a leftist doesn't mean that they're always on our side or that they don't have white chauvinism or white supremacy embedded in them. Let's continue here. Despite the numerous examples of white chauvinism, there was no doubt that the party was making advances in regards to Negro work. In fact, it was precisely because of these advances that chauvinistic practices, which hitherto had gone under wraps, were brought out into the open and attacked. Briggs's series of 3 articles was the sharpest attack on white chauvinism ever published by the party. Their publication reflected that despite the many shortcomings in our work, there was a growing awareness in the party leadership of the seriousness of the question. The rapid deterioration of economic conditions affecting both black and white workers allowed no complacency. If the party was going to play a leading role in the coming struggle, it would have to carry on a continuous struggle against white chauvinistic ideology and practices. I was heartened by Briggs's article. At the same time, however, I was somewhat disturbed. While Briggs evoked the Comintern resolution on the Negro question in his blast against white chauvinism, he was curiously silent on the theory and program underlying the resolution. It was certainly true, as Briggs said, that among revolutionary white workers, white chauvinism was often manifested in the general underestimation of the role of the Negro masses in the revolutionary struggle. But to say no more than that was to avoid the essence of the question. What were the ideas and theories fueling this underestimation? Clearly, they were to be found in the remnants of Lovestone's line, which still clung to the party, the hangovers of the social democratic view, which considered the fight against the special oppression of blacks to be a diversion from the class struggle. Some things never change, right? Some things never change. I mean, if you think about, the Bernie bros and the people that, are advancing democratic socialism, some of them are class reductionists. They say the only thing that matters is class. We just need to focus on helping the working class, helping the proletariat, et cetera, et cetera. We just need to do that. And now realizing that, for example, just for black people in America, that there is a specific set of circumstances that need to be addressed, and that is white supremacy, white chauvinism, the underestimation of black people in the workforce, and the specific needs that we have, right? So yeah, that's some things never change, right? Some things never change. You still hear this line today where people say it's all about class. We don't need to really be focusing on, or there is nothing we can do about the question of racism or white supremacy in America or in any other place. We just need to focus on class. Anyway, the new line was a drastic break with the social chauvinistic doctrines of the past. And in it, the party had a mighty weapon in the fight against white chauvinism and petty bourgeoisie nationalism of the Garvey stripe. But the new line could not simply be declared, it had to be fought for. As months passed, Nasanov and I searched in vain through the party press and documents for further discussions of the 1928 resolution. The resolution of the October 29 plenum of the Central Committee had noted the increasingly important role of the black proletariat played in building the new unions. Its program of action called for merciless struggle against white chauvinism and any attempt towards segregating the Negro workers. Following the plenum, the National Agitprop Department had promised to publish a special discussion bulletin on the Afro-American question. None ever materialized, however. By the beginning of 1930, it was becoming clear to us that there was not only confusion in the party, but definite opposition to the new line. As if to confirm our misgivings, the February 1930 issue of The Communist contained an article by veteran black communist Otto Hueswood titled World Aspects of the Negro Question. It was the first article in a year to broach the theoretical aspects of the question, but it was a direct challenge to the line of the Comintern Sixth Congress. Hueswood sought to establish a difference in character between the oppression of blacks in Africa and the West Indies and those in the U.S. The question in Africa and the West Indies, he contended, was a national question. But in the United States, it was a race question. And this goes back to, the main thing that I think Harry Haywood is guiding me towards and guiding the reader towards is really understanding and sympathizing with his view that in America, it's not a race question or an issue of just racism for black people in America and how do we solve it. We are a national group that deserves our own nation. Black nationalism in its truest sense. I've been thinking about that every single day since I started reading this book. I go over the arguments in my head. I really try to consider it. I'm still not sold on it, but I understand where it comes from. I understand the sympathy he has towards this idea, or why other people will be sympathetic toward this idea. I'm still not sold. Anyway, according to Hueswood, the black minority in the... please don't tell me we're missing a page. Okay. Wait, what the fuck? My God. 320. Why do we have two 320s? We have 2 pages listed as 320. Okay. All right. This book is... I got the wrong PDF. So according to Hueswood, the black minority in... Okay, the black minority in the U.S. lacked the requisites of a nation. It had no distinct language and culture from the dominant racial group. Its only distinguishing feature is its racial origin. Thus, Hueswood pulled the Afro-American question out of the category of national colonial questions and dumped it back into the muddy waters of race question. He had fallen back upon Seek and his social race theory, which asserted the primacy of the race factor, race ideologies, and the oppression of U.S. blacks. By making race primary, Hueswood's article denied the validity of self-determination as a slogan for black liberation. It rejected the concept of blacks in the South as an oppressed nation and therefore rejected the perspective which called for the development of a national revolutionary movement based on the masses of black soil tillers and workers in that region. Huswood's article demanded an answer. Nasanov and I felt that it could, in the end, serve a positive purpose, and that our reply afforded an excellent opportunity to clarify a number of areas of misunderstanding and confusion. Our response could be the vehicle to finally settle accounts with Sikh and demolish his social race theory. Nasanov had already written a polemic against Sikh, exposing the latter's incredible ignorance of Lenin's position on the national question. This was to be published in the April issue of The Communist. I would take on Huswood directly. First, I assured his assertion that blacks in the U.S. had no special culture. Negroes have a culture which reflects their whole historical development as a people in the U.S., I pointed out. And as a separate language, this is not one of the prerequisites of the nation. I referred to Stalin, who said, a common language for every nation, but not necessarily different languages for different nations. Interesting. So a nation needs to have a common language, just like how Brazil and Portugal both speak Portuguese, right? Austria and Germany both speak German to some degree, whether it be dialectic, whether it has a dialect or accent or not. But it doesn't have to be different. It doesn't have to be distinctly different. There are many Arabic-speaking nations, and they are all different, right? Anyway, but was there, in fact, a difference in the character of oppression between blacks in the U.S. on the one hand and in Africa and the West Indies on the other? I concluded that there was no such difference. It was clear to me, of course, that blacks in the U.S. were not a colony in the formal sense of the term. Unlike a colony, they were not separated geographically from the metropolitan country. There was, however, no substantive difference in the character of black oppression in the United States and the colonies and semi-colonies. In both instances, imperialist policy was directed towards forcibly arresting the free economic and cultural development of the people, towards keeping them backward as an essential condition for super-exploitation. In attempting to prove a difference in the character of oppression, Huswood wound up downgrading the anti-imperialist context of the black liberation struggle in the United States. Since the Sixth Congress, I had given considerable thought to the race factor and its role in the question of U.S. blacks. Certainly, it was clear that race played an important role in the Afro-American question, but it was only one element and not the central question itself. Of course, I pointed out, it would be a serious mistake to underestimate the profound social role played by these theories. Arising first as a moral sanction for a national colonial policy, these dogmas became fixed in laws, in turn influenced politics, and in this manner react again upon the social and economic basis, sharpening and deepening the exploitation of subject peoples and perpetuating the existing social relations. In reality, I wrote, the racial persecution of blacks was a particular form and device of national oppression. The racial element was a peculiarity of the question of U.S. blacks. Nowhere, with the exception of apartheid in South Africa, had race been made to play such a decisive role. Nowhere had it served for such a long period as an instrument of ruling class oppression. The prominence of racial ideologies and black oppression in the U.S. arose from the necessity of the white rulers to maintain the degradation of blacks in the midst of the most modern and advanced capitalist society in the world. Under these conditions, the bourgeois rulers had to pursue the most energetic policy in order to keep up the bar of separation between white and Negroes, that is, retard the process of assimilation and thus preserve the conditions for the super-exploitation of the latter. I hope YouTube doesn't flag this video because I use that word. But in continuing. In the absence of pronounced cultural distinctions, such as language or religion, I argued the racial visibility of U.S. blacks was used by bourgeois social theorists as the most convenient factor upon which to erect spurious theories of white supremacy, in order to set them apart from the masses of the white population as permanent objects of scorn. Sikh, and then Huswood, on the other hand, counterposed the race question to the national question. They asserted that blacks were separated from the dominant white race solely by artificial racial divisions and race oppression rising on this basis. Seek compounded these errors when he reduced the whole national question to a struggle between competing bourgeoisies for markets. Among American Negroes, there is no developing industrial bourgeoisie, hindered in its economic development, the struggle of which, for its free economic development, for the winning of internal markets, and for the removal of obstacles standing in the path of economic progress, could give these national movements a progressive character. But the national question, as Stalin pointed out, had undergone changes from that earlier period when it first appeared as part of the bourgeois revolution. Now, in the period of socialist revolution, it was part of the struggle of the proletariat. It is quite evident that the main point here is not that the bourgeoisie of one nationality is beating or may beat the bourgeoisie of another nationality in the competitive struggle, but that the imperialist group of the ruling nationality is exploiting and oppressing the bulk of the masses. Above all, the peasant masses of the colonies and dependent nationalities, and that by oppressing and exploiting them, it is drawing them into the struggle against imperialism, converting them into allies of the proletarian revolution. This was in sharp contrast to the formulation put forward by Seek and espoused by Haywood. Seek, I contended, made the ideological factor of racism more important than the social question itself. Thus, in asserting the primacy of racial factors in the question, Seek and Haywood reduced the black liberation struggle to a struggle against racial ideology. They saw only the bourgeois assimilationist trend, a striving towards intermingling and amalgamation, towards full social equality in the struggle, and not the potential national revolutionary trends of the masses. The black liberation struggle was reduced to a feeble bourgeois liberal protest against racism and racist ideology, divorced from its economic roots and to be resolved through education and humanitarian uplift. Feeling that it would add some clarity to the situation, I ended my piece with the serious economic and historical analysis of the question that Seek and Haywood had so assiduously avoided. As I saw it, the evolution of American blacks as an oppressed nation was the result of the unfinished bourgeois democratic revolution of the Civil War and Reconstruction. The advent of imperialism froze the blacks in their post-Reconstruction position, landless, semi-slaves in the South. It permanently blocked the road to fusion of blacks and whites into one nation on the basis of equality under capitalism. The struggle for genuine equality was thenceforth ultimately bound in the South to take a national revolutionary and socialist revolutionary direction. This position defined the status of blacks in the North as an unassimilable national minority, as the shadow of the plantation fell upon them throughout the country. So the point Harry Haywood is making right here is that after Reconstruction, America had a brief chance to actually make one nation of white and black people. But when Reconstruction was purposely sabotaged, it's impossible now for black Americans and white Americans to ever truly exist in the same nation without blacks being the subjects of oppression and exploitation. Therefore, it is a national question. It is a desire. It is ideal for black Americans to have their own nation, whether in the United States. That's the point he's trying to make. This is another argument. Once again, am I buying it? Could we have another Reconstruction? Couldn't we, abolish our current Constitution and have another constitutional convention to rewrite it? This time the Founding Fathers come from all walks of life and primarily from the working class and the proletariat. Is that another way of doing it? Is it permanently blocked? Because this is the argument he makes. Harry Haywood makes the argument, we are permanently blocked from the fusion of white workers and black workers, white people and black people existing in this country, being of the same nation. I don't know. I'm going to continue here. I think Haywood was won over by my argument. At least I saw nothing more in the party press trumpeting Seek's race theories. In looking back on the thing now, I think it was a sort of skirmish in the war to carry out a revolutionary program on the black national question. As long as the party leadership facilitated in carrying out the line of the Sixth Congress, such old and reactionary theories were bound to persist. I must say, however, that things were not standing still at home. While progress in the struggle was slow, it was progress nevertheless. Amid a great upsurge in the workers' movement, the party was beginning to implement the line of the Sixth Congress, although there was still some vacillation. Our biggest thrill that spring had been the nationwide demonstrations of the unemployed led by the party and the TUUL on March 6, 1930. Over 1.25 million workers responded to the party's call in over a dozen cities coast to coast. Hundreds of workers and party leaders were arrested. William Z. Foster, Robert Minor, Israel Amter, and Harry Raymond were sentenced to 3 years in jail for leading a demonstration of 110,000 in New York's Union Square. They served at least a year of these sentences. The party also led large and militant May Day demonstrations in several cities. All this clearly indicated that the party was becoming a leader of the masses. As more and more people were thrown into struggle by the deepening economic crisis and the capitalist offensive. The party chalked up an astounding success in its recruitment drive. In a period of 2 or 3 months, the party recruited into its ranks over 6,000 new members, 90% from basic industry and 1,000 of whom were blacks. A considerable number of the latter had come from the disintegrating Garvey movement. In the midst of this upsurge, the 7th Convention of the U.S. Party convened in New York on June 22, 1930, and Nassanov and I followed the proceedings closely. The party's estimate of the economic crisis and the perspectives for the future were discussed in detail, emphasizing the need to defeat the right deviation in the party. As summarized by Browder, then General Secretary, the convention observed that the economic crisis shows the stabilization of capitalism approaching its end, that it brings close the realization of war, and that it will in many countries be transformed into a political crisis, and that the working class will be more and more unable to find any path except that of revolutionary struggle. At the same time, the convention recognized the need to struggle against the leftist concept of the crisis as the automatic bearer of revolution. Internally, the party was in qualitatively different position than it had been at the time of the Sixth Convention in 1929. It had broken away from the crippling factionalism that had all but paralyzed its work. It was now consolidating its forces on the basis of the decisions of the CI and had seized the initiative in the growing revolutionary trend in the country. There were a score of black delegates, 17% present, and for the first time, the Afro-American question was characterized as the problem of our party. While it was evident that important advances had been made in the work, the convention brought out that this could not be credited to the clarity of understanding of the party as a whole, and that a proper orientation is lacking. Much discussion and debate did not clear up this confusion. Browder, for instance, denigrated the slogan of self-determination by making the black rebellion contingent upon a revolutionary situation in the whole country. The transformation of this slogan into one of action is conditioned upon the maturing of a revolutionary situation for American capitalist society. Overall, however, we felt the convention represented progress in terms of work among U.S. blacks. My 3-year term at the Lenin School was drawing toward a close in June 1930. I began thinking about home and what awaited me on my return. I had little organizational experience in the party before coming to the Soviet Union and now began to wonder what type of work I would be doing. But I was to find that Nassanov had other immediate plans for me. He felt that I should stay for a few months longer and work with the CI. It was felt, I presumed, by Kusanen and others that the Comintern should intervene once more on the black question. Clearly, the brief resolution adopted at the Sixth Congress 2 years previous was not sufficient. Now a more detailed statement of the question was needed. They had in mind another CI commission on the question that would meet after the 7th Convention of the U.S. Party. One set up to discuss and work out such a statement when all the proceedings from that convention were available. The convention would undoubtedly point up remaining areas of confusion. "Wouldn't it be best for you to stay, Harry?" asked Nassanov. "Eventually everything will work out," he said. "But it would be better for you to return with a new CI resolution. That way you'll be off to a good start. If you left now, you might get battered about in the fight there." Now, I don't know how I feel about Harry being sent back to America because I think Harry might have had a better life in general. I don't know what's going to happen in his life, but I always believe, I've held this belief for a long time, that a black American has a better chance of living a full, healthy life outside of America. I can't find anything redeeming about black life in America. Not that black peoples are at fault for our lives, but that white supremacy in America is so all-encompassing. I'd much rather be a black person in Moscow, even at the turn of the 20th century, than a black person in any time in American history. But that's just my opinion. I would try to, if I was Harry, I would have tried to find a way to stay. Plus, your wife is Russian too, man. You good. You Gucci. You have a reason to stay. Anyway, the RILU's Fifth Congress. The Fifth Congress of the Red International of Labor Unions was to convene in Moscow August 15th, 1930. Delegates started arriving several weeks early. The U.S. delegation, 30 strong, included 7 blacks, the largest number ever to attend an RILU Congress. They had come to Moscow via Hamburg, where they had participated together with Africans and West Indian blacks in the founding conference of the International Trade Union Committee of Negro Workers, initiated by the RILU. The Hamburg delegation was led by James Ford, head of the Negro Department of the Trade Union Unity League, a member of the executive committee of the RILU, and provisional chairman and chief organizer of the Hamburg Conference. His co-worker and assistant was George Padmore, also a TUUL national organizer. The U.S. delegation included Harold Williams, Kutva graduate and a member of the Railroad Workers Union in Chicago, Helen McLean, a Philadelphia Needles trade worker, Ike Hawkins, a Pennsylvania coal miner, and Arthur Murphy, a Pennsylvania steelworker. Of the delegation, I only knew Ford and Padmore, and I hastened to make the acquaintance of the other delegates. They were a young, enthusiastic group, fresh from struggles in their respective industries in which they had played leading roles. I was especially impressed by the young black woman from Philadelphia, Helen McLean. She was a natural leader, lively, attractive, humorous, and the center of attention. The delegates filled me in on news from home and related what had happened at the Hamburg Conference. The conference had been in preparation for nearly a year. A provisional committee had been set up under the chairmanship of Jimmy Ford. It was originally scheduled to be held in London, metropolis of the world's greatest colonial power. But it appeared that the conference organizers had reckoned without their host. The preparations came under the scrutiny of His Majesty's Labor government, headed by Ramsay MacDonald, whose colonial secretary was the well-known Fabian socialist Sidney Webb. They would not allow the conference to meet in London, and at the last minute, delegates and organizers moved it to Hamburg, Germany. After some delay, it opened on July 7th, 1929. There were 17 regular delegates and 3 fraternal, non-voting delegates, representing 20,000 workers in 7 countries. Besides the U.S. delegates, there were delegates from Jamaica, Nigeria, Gambia, the Gold Coast, now called Ghana, the former German colonies of the Cameroons, now Cameroon, and South Africa. The South African delegate was a white trade unionist, an active fighter for black-white unity in the trade union movement, who was acting as a proxy for a black trade unionist whom the apartheid government had denied a passport. The conference lasted 3 days. There was an interchange of experiences, reports by Ford, Padmore, and Patterson, the last of fraternal delegates from Anti-Imperialist League. A number of resolutions were adopted and a permanent organization formed, the International Trade Union Committee for Negro Workers. An executive board was elected, including Ford, Hawkins, McLean, and Padmore from the U.S., Kouyaté from French West Africa, Mark Macaulay from Nigeria, Albert Nzulu from South Africa, G. Small of Gambia, G. Reed of Jamaica. Representatives from Haiti, Liberia, and East Africa were to be added. A monthly publication, The Negro Worker, was established with Padmore as the editor. Headquarters of the organization were set up in Hamburg. We need to bring that magazine back, but not call it The Negro Worker. Call it The Black Worker or Black Works. You get what I'm saying? That would be hard. That would be dope. Headquarters of the organization were set up in Hamburg. Many black sailors came into that international port. The second largest was in Europe, and the organization's literature later was circulated there by these sailors throughout Africa. The International Trade Union Committee of Negro Workers was the first attempt to bring together black workers on a world scale. Though the funding conference was small, it was historically important because it was the first time black workers from Africa and the Americas had gotten together. It was a wedge into black Africa, which hitherto, with the exceptions of South Africa, had been isolated from the world revolutionary movement. The main effort of the organization was to promote trade union organization in Africa and the West Indies, linking them up with the world revolutionary trade union movement led by the RILU. Black workers in the U.S. were to play a vanguard role in this endeavor because of their greater political and organizational experience, the result of their position as an oppressed people in the heartland of the most advanced capitalist country. The Fifth Congress of the RILU met in the Dom Soyuzov, House of the Unions, meeting place for most of the international congresses held in Moscow. I attended a number of the sessions of the Congress along with delegates from 35 countries. As this was also the 10th anniversary of the RILU, business sessions were accompanied by a number of festivities. Our Soviet host seemed determined to make it a memorable occasion. One of the things I remember best about the Congress was the presence of a dozen or so veterans of the 1871 Paris Commune. Now old men in their 70s and 80s, as I remember, they wore uniforms, red caps, red-lined blue capes, and short white canvas leggings. At the opening celebration, one of the men, on seeing us, rushed up to embrace me, welcoming us as my brothers fighting for the world commune. When the Congress opened, the Moscow Press published an article by RILU leader A. Lazovsky. He listed the main tasks of the Congress: closer to the masses by means of the United Front from below, combat right opportunism and left sectarianism, the actual leadership of the economic mass struggle of the proletariat, aid for the weakest sections of the world proletariat, closer contact of the colonial slaves with the working class of the capitalists. He had summarized in an article published 2 weeks before the Congress. When the RILU was formed in 1920, the main errors came from left anarcho-syndicalist tendencies. But in later years, especially after the 9th plenum of the ECCI and the 4th RILU Congress in 1928, the main danger came from the right. By 1930, open right opposition to the decisions of these meetings had been defeated, and remaining right tendencies, though still very dangerous, were under attack. Oh no, here we go again. More party politics. More party politics. Somebody kill me. Kill me now. Kill me. Take my soul from me. I do not want more party politics. No. No. We don't want that. But anyway, let's continue. Like I said, we're reading it page by page, brick by brick. We're going to tear this motherfucker down. Let's go. Lazovsky warned, however, that in the course of the fight against right opportunist tendencies and for the line of class against class and independent leadership of economic struggles, left sectarian tendencies had cropped up, involving the danger of alienation from the masses. This left tendency was one which lumped together the social fascists, reformist leaders, and the workers who followed them. Not knowing how to work in reformist trade unions for the realization of the united front from below, they shouted leftist slogans such as permanent general strike and armed strikes, all of which remained mere words. Finally, Lazovsky pointed to the RILU's weaknesses. The most important of these faults are lagging behind the mass and the disproportion between political influence and organizational consolidation of this influence. In spite of all this, the RILU has accompanied a great work in uniting, rallying, and ideologically welding together the forces of the international revolutionary movement. The Congress only lasted about 10 days. I attended a number of sessions and had the chance to hear Lazovsky, Padmore, and James Ford, who reported on the Hamburg Conference. The conference broke down into working commissions. Each national delegation met to discuss their respective problems. After the Congress adjourned, the delegates were taken on tours of the Soviet Union, the Dnieperstroy Dam, the Stalingrad plants, and other sites. All right, please, please, please let the party politics be done. Let the party politics be done. No. The 1930 resolution. Okay. The Negro Commission of the CI convened in late August under the chairmanship of Otto Kusanen. Members of the commission included Earl Browder, James Ford, Bill Dunn, William Weinstone, William Patterson, Ming Gullion, head of the Anglo-American Secretariat, Mikhailov, CI rep to the U.S. Party, Nasanov, myself, and several black students from the Lenin School and Kutva. Let this be a lesson to everybody out there. This book is called Black Bolshevik for a very good reason, because Harry Haywood learned how to be a good communist, a good party member, by doing the litany of red tape. You know, in the Soviet Union, red tape kill you. Bureaucracy kill you. Political machinations kill you. Put that on the page. You get what I'm saying? This is insane. This is insane. This is not why I picked up this book. I didn't pick up the book just to get a bunch of, I'm pissed. I'm joking. I'm joking a little bit, but I'm a bit pissed. I'm sorry. Let me continue reading, because I know there's somebody out there who's like, Simon, please just read the text. This is the most fascinating part. I have to know what the RILU Council resolution will be. I'm sorry. Please, Simon, I need to know what the resolution is going to be. I'm dying. I'm on the edge of my seat right here. Anyway. Let me stop. Okay. Kusanen was well versed in the problems of the U.S. Party and its work among blacks. Prior to the commission and in preparation for it, he had talked on numerous occasions with Nasanov and myself, as well as with leading U.S. comrades present in Moscow. He had also received a report from Mikhailov, who had recently returned from a visit to the U.S. He immediately got down to the business at hand. As I remember, he commended the U.S. Party on its recent progress in Afro-American work and its struggle against white chauvinism. This was reflected in the fact that the party in the last year had recruited over 1,000 blacks into its ranks. However, he observed, despite this advance, the pre-convention discussion preceding the 7th convention of the party and the convention itself revealed that there was still much confusion on the question. This fact had been admitted by the leading American comrades themselves. Looking over the materials from the discussion on the question, it was quite clear, he noted, that the party had not yet overcome all underestimation of the slogan of the right of self-determination. There was still large areas of unclarity on the question generally. Basically, what he's trying to say is like, the party is still, edging towards saying black people need their own nation. The Communist Party is like saying, yeah, this is the line we want to follow. We want to say that, black people deserve self-determination in the United States. But they're still like playing footsie with it. They're not sure if they want to fully embrace it or if they really grasp the scope of what they're trying to make a part of the party platform. So Kusanen then proceeded to pinpoint these areas as a false counterposing of the slogan of social equality and the right of self-determination and the lack of understanding of their interrelationship. The U.S. Convention had raised, but not answered, the following questions. Should the right of self-determination be considered only a slogan of propaganda or one of action? Should separatist tendencies among blacks be supported or opposed? Should the area of black concentration in the South be regarded as a colony or as an integral part of the national economy of the United States? Could a revolutionary uprising in the South independent of the revolutionary movement in the country as a whole? Kusanen suggested the discussion center on these areas of unclarity, without excluding any other questions comrades might want to raise. After the discussion, a new resolution should be drafted addressing itself to these questions. I noticed the bitterness and acrimony that had characterized earlier meetings were absent from our discussions that followed. Freed from factional considerations, it was evident that everyone was honestly seeking clarity on the question. After a few days of discussion, Kusanen himself had undertook to draft a resolution. Further discussion followed, but on the whole there was agreement. After a few minor changes, it was adopted by the Commission and eventually became the resolution of the American Party on the black national question. The resolution proceeded straight to the heart of the controversial issues. It reasserted the position of the Sixth Congress, which defined U.S. blacks as an oppressed nation. Implicitly, it rejected the position of Sikh and others with their one-sided emphasis on race as the primary factor in black oppression. Stressing instead the basic social and economic factors, it defined it as a question of an oppressed nation which is in a peculiar and extraordinarily distressing situation of national oppression, and that only in view of the problem of racial distinction, marked differences in the color of skin, but above all because of considerable social antagonisms, remnants of slavery. The resolution struck out at the tendency to counterpose the slogans of social equality and the right of self-determination, and dealt in detail with their interrelationship. In this respect, it pointed out the necessity of making a clear distinction between the North and the South in the application of these slogans, between the oppressed black nation in the South and the national minority in the North. Equality, the resolution contended, could only be obtained by the continuous fight for abolition of all forms of economic and political oppression of the Negroes, as well as their social exclusion, the results perpetrated against them, and their segregation. This is to be obtained by constant struggle by the white and black workers for effective legal protections for blacks in all fields, as well as actual enforcement of their equality and combating of every expression of Negrophobia. One of the first communist slogans is "Death for Negro Lynching." Put that on a t-shirt. So many opportunities for the party to be selling fire merchandise. Fire merchandise. Is that anti-communist if we sell fire merchandise? I don't think so. Sell that merchandise. Death for Negro lynching. You lynch one, we lynch 5 of y'all. You're going to turn Alabama into Gaza. Ain't that right? Continuing here. The demand for equality, the resolution said, applies to all Negroes in the North, as well as in the South. In the North, it embraced all, or almost all, the special needs of the masses of the blacks. This, however, was not so in respect to the South, where the situation of blacks was that of an oppressed nation. Here the resolution held, the main communist slogan must be the right of self-determination of the Negroes in the Black Belt. So they're making a distinction here. They're saying clearly, this is not just a slogan. Self-determination just doesn't mean, equality, kumbaya, integration. It means if you're in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, black people need their own nation. They need their own nation. And for the black people that live in Chicago, New York, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Los Angeles, death to Negro lynchers. Equal rights and death to Negro lynchers if you live outside of the Black Belt. This makes me wonder, which would I rather choose? Living in, Seattle, where, the communists are saying, hey, we're going to kill anybody that lynches a black man, which I might be the black man they lynch, so I don't get the joy of seeing it. Or would I rather be in the Black Belt, where we're arguing for the right to self-determination? That's hard to choose. I'm sorry. But once again, I like the idea. I'm just not sold. I don't know if that makes sense. Can you say you like something, but you're not sold on it? You get what I'm saying? I don't get it. I don't know. Anyway. You know what it's like? It's like leg lengthening surgery. I'm killing that one guy out there. It's like, Simon, please continue to read. I want to hear the resolution. I'm killing you. I'm sorry to you, boss. But listen, it reminds me of leg lengthening surgery. I want to get leg lengthening surgery. I want to be taller. I want to be 6'7". That would be great. But am I sold on the procedure? I don't want to be doing squats in the gym and then my legs fold like origami. You get what I'm saying? I don't want that shit to happen. I'm sorry. I'm going to continue here. In the South, the attainment of full equality involved the question of political power needed for its enforcement, and this could be construed in no other manner than political power in the hands of the black masses of peasants and workers of that region. This, in turn, could only be achieved through the fulfillment of the main slogan of the right of self-determination. This did not mean that the slogan of equality was not applicable to the South, where blacks suffered the glaring lack of all equality, but here it applied to the most urgent, partial, or immediate demands of the black masses. The two slogans were thus closely connected. The winning of self-determination in the South was the prerequisite for full equality in the North. Anticipating the possibility of autonomous demands in the North, the resolution added, the struggle for the equal rights of the Negroes does not in any way exclude recognition and support for the Negroes' rights to use their own special schools, government organs, etc., wherever the Negro masses put forward such national demands of their own accord. Interesting. So they're saying here, yeah, it's all about self-determination for black people in the South, But if black people in the North say we want our own schools, our own hospitals, our own roads because we don't trust the white establishment, that should be granted too. I mean, this is the most radical. This should get me excited. How does that not get you excited? How does that not, put your hairs on end that this is actually, a party that's mostly ran by, whites, you get what I'm saying? But it has, black people in charge on the Central Committee, et cetera, right? Like, how can you not get excited about that? That's a radical platform that answers and addresses, some fundamental questions of what it means to be black in America and some of the issues of what we're facing as black people in America. It's exciting. It's enthralling. You get what I'm saying? But is it what most of us want? Harriet Tubman once said, I could have freed more slaves if they knew that they were enslaved. You get what I'm saying? I don't know. Am I still in the cave? Have I not come out of the cave and seen the light and know that the shadows that I've seen all my life are really just representations of the real? Have I not been nation pilled yet? I don't know. I can't feel like any sort of nationalism. I cannot imagine me putting my hand over my heart, looking at a flag, and singing a national anthem in full honesty, even if it's for the pro-black Dr. Umar Tariq Nasheed Nation. I couldn't do it. I don't know why. Even if Malcolm X was president, Tupac Shakur was Secretary of Defense, and Huey P. Newton was the Minister of Education, I can't feel any sort of nationalism. I don't know what it is. Maybe I have a disease. The resolution emphasized that the question was a national question in the U.S., not only in the South, but also in the North. It went on to say that the struggle for equal rights for the Negroes is, in fact, one of the most important parts of the proletarian class struggle in the United States. White workers must march at the head of this struggle. They must everywhere make a breach in the walls of segregation and Jim Crowism, which have been set up by bourgeois slave market morality. White workers must boldly jump at the throat of the 100% bandits who strike a Negro in the face. Okay, that's raw. Okay, John Brown brigades. We starting the John Brown brigades. All right. This struggle will be the test of the real international solidarity of the American white workers. Basically telling the white boys they got to turn up. Okay? My last year in the Soviet Union, page 335. The resolution rejected the characterization of the Black Belt, the area of black concentration in the South, as a colony. Such characterization, it contended, could only be based on artificially construed analogies and would create superfluous difficulties for the clarification of ideas. However, it warned it would be nonetheless false to try to make a fundamental distinction between the character of national oppression to which the colonial peoples are subjected and the yoke of other oppressed nations. The resolution asserted that the Black Belt is not in itself, either economically or politically, such a united whole as to warrant it being called a special colony of the United States. Nor, on the other hand, was it such an integral part of the United States as any other part of the country. For one thing, the industrialization of the Black Belt, in contrast to most colonies, was not in conflict with the interests of the ruling U.S. imperialists. Therefore, expansion of industry in the Black Belt would in no way bring a solution to the question of living conditions of the oppressed Negro majority, or to the agrarian question, which lies at the basis of the national question. Industrialization in the area would only sharpen the contradictions in that it would bring forth the most important driving force of the national revolution, the black working class. The resolution lists three fundamental slogans of the liberation movement in the South. The right of self-determination. This slogan, however, can be carried out only in connection with two other basic slogans. 2, revolutionary land reform. The resolution pointed out that landed property in the hands of white American exploiters is the most important basis of the entire system of national oppression. The agrarian revolution must be completed by the confiscation of the landed property of white landlords and capitalists in favor of the black masses of black farmers. Basically, kill the boy, rah, and take his land. That's what it's saying. Basically, we have to forcefully take the land from rich white people in the South and give it to poor black folks. How does that not excite you? How does that not get you excited? That's hard. That's hard, bruh. That's hard. That's hard. I mean, reparations. 3. The establishment of the state unity of the Black Belt. The resolution called for the political and geographic unity of the Black Belt, that is, the bridging together of black majority areas in one governmental administrative unit. This would include a significant white minority. The resolution assails the idea of a nation state exclusively inhabited by blacks or the transportation of blacks to Africa. Any such attempt to isolate and transport the Negroes, the resolution warned, would have the most damaging effect upon their interests. Above all, it would violate the rights of the Negro farmers in the Black Belt, not only to their present residences and their land, but also to the land owned by the white landlords and cultivated by Negro labor. The right of self-determination means, according to the resolution, the unlimited right of blacks to the region to exercise, if they so choose, governmental, legislative, and judiciary authority over the entire territory and to decide upon the relations between their territory and other nations, including the United States. This sounds like, to me, like an autonomous region. You get what I'm saying? Like how certain countries have regions that have more autonomy and freedom than others. I think an example might be in Spain. You know, the Basque Country and Catalonia have freedom away from Madrid, if you get what I'm saying. I think that's what he's trying to imply, that the Black Belt should be made into one governmental body, let's say a state or a territory, whatever. Black people would have judicial control, control over the affairs of the state. It might still be a part of the United States if people so choose, but they would have more freedom to run things, right? I don't know. That's how I'm interpreting that. Anyway, yeah, above all, it would violate the rights of the Negro farmers in the Black Belt, not only to their present residences and their land, but also to the land owned by the white landlords and cultivated by Negro labor. That's hilarious. So they're saying we can't send black people back to Africa because there's white people land that we need to take here. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. And by the way, the land that's owned by the white man is not even his own land. He stole it from the Native Americans and forced us to work it, so we just gonna take that back. Just, thank you, we gonna pinch that right there. That's hard. That's a hilarious sentence if you think about it. It would violate the rights of black farmers in the Black Belt to not only their land, but the land that is owed to them by the white people that they're going to take it from. I love it. I love it. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. The right of self-determination means, according to the resolution, the unlimited right of blacks in the region to exercise, if they so choose, governmental, legislative, and judicial authority over the entire territory and to decide upon the relations between their territory and other nations, including the United States. This would mean the overthrow of the class rule of U.S. imperialists, upon whose power the local landlords and capitalists depended. The right of self-determination, therefore, included the full freedom of separation for the black nation. The resolution contended that if it desires to separate, it must be free to do so. But if it prefers to remain federated with the United States, it must also be free to do that. This, the resolution stated, was the correct meaning of self-determination. This right must be fought for as a free democratic right, whether the U.S. was still a capitalist state or whether the proletarian state had been established. So the point they're trying to make here is, ideally, in the U.S., the rich billionaires and millionaires that own everything, own the means of production, they get killed or overthrown or sent to the gulag, whatever. The People's Republic of America is established. And when the People's Republic of America is established, the Black Belt is made into its own autonomous region, and the Black Belt can then decide, do y'all want to remain a part of the U.S.? Do you want to go? Either way, you're going to have your own freedom, right? Basically, giving black people guns, money, land, their former slave masters' land, their oppressors' land, and then telling them you're free to do what you want, which is ideal. Also, on the other hand, whether the capitalist ruling class, the bourgeoisie overlords, are killed, thrown to the gulag, or remain in power, whatever, the same thing should still happen. The black, nation state should still be established in the South. is what they're trying to say. Very radical party platform. I don't see the Democrats doing this anytime soon. This is interesting. This is interesting. Anyway, continuing here. All right. But the right of self-determination must not be construed as identical with secession. The resolution quoted Lenin: "We demand freedom of separation, real right to self-determination, certainly not in order to recommend separation, but on the contrary, in order to facilitate and accelerate the democratic rapprochement and unification of nations." So it's not just separating the nation to then create a new nation, which then becomes, hard borders, right? Because what does Marx tell us? Workers of the world unite across all borders, right? So it's eventually to get rid of all of these borders, because these borders are artificial creations by the bourgeois capitalist class for the exploitation of a specific group of people's labor. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's separation for further unification, if that makes sense. Because we all, at the end of the day, we don't want these nation states. None of these nation states were created by the people. They were created by a certain class that wanted to further their own interests. Which is maybe why I can't be nationalistic. I don't know. Anyway, the resolution noted that separatist trends in the black movement should not be supported indiscriminately and without criticism. There were reactionary separatist trends as well as national revolutionary trends. As an example of the former, it was pointed out, was Garvey's African utopia of an isolated nation state consisting of blacks alone. Afrofascism. Politically, this was a diversion from the struggle against U.S. imperialism. Even if the situation does not yet warrant the raising of the question of uprising, one should not limit oneself at present to propaganda for the demand. Right to self-determination, but should organize mass actions such as demonstrations, strikes, tax boycott movements, etc. The resolution enjoined communists to stand in the forefront of the fight for national liberation and to fight for the hegemony of the black proletariat in the national struggle. It outlined the party's tasks in building revolutionary organizations in the South, organizing proletarian and peasant self-defense against the KKK and other like reactionaries. Final success in this struggle was possible only if supported by the mass actions of black and white proletarians throughout the country. Only a victorious proletarian revolution will finally decide the agrarian question and the national question in the South of the United States, in the interest of the predominating mass of the Negro population in the country. It spoke directly against those who held that the Black Rebellion was contingent upon the maturing of the revolutionary situation in the country as a whole, or that it could only develop at the same pace as the overall class struggle. This assumption, widespread in the party at the time, reflected an underestimation of the inherently explosive character of the liberation struggle in the South. Lenin defined national rebellion as mass resistance to oppression. Every act of national oppression calls forth resistance, he wrote, and further that the tendency of every act of resistance on the part of the oppressed peoples is the national uprising. The entire thrust of the resolution was to prepare the party for any contingency. Whether the rebellion of the Negroes is to be the outcome of a general revolutionary situation in the United States, whether it is to originate in the whirlpool of decisive fights for power by the working class, for proletarian dictatorship, or whether, on the contrary, the Negro rebellion will be the prelude of gigantic struggles for power by the American proletariat cannot be foretold now. Basically saying, listen, there are many ways that this shit could go down, because the American empire is going to fall, right? And the bourgeoisie and the proletariat are always at odds and in conflict. So whether this shit goes down, whether we establish a dictatorship of the proletariat, or whether we live under 1,000 years of capitalist exploitative rule, and black people say they finally had enough of police shooting them in the back or getting the low end of the stick and being at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. No matter how this shit goes down, we have an answer to this. Black self-determination in the Black Belt, death to lynchers, death to white supremacists throughout the country, period. So that's a very radical platform. It's a very radical and profound and deep platform, moving platform. Almost brings me to tears. Almost brings me to tears to hear that people were thinking so radically and so forward at this time, when things were so grim. Things were so grim. This was being put down in the late 1920s and 1930s, and at some of our darkest moments. Most of our people were illiterate, had no freedom, had no job prospects. Our political class was regularly assassinated and lynched. We were 30 to 40 years removed from the formal end of segregation and apartheid in America. Things were our darkest, and people were thinking this radical and deep. This is powerful. This is powerful. And there were also white allies at the time that were saying, listen, we want to kill these KKK members. We will teach black people how to murder them. We will unionize black and white workers together. This is powerful. This is radical. This is moving. This is touching. But I'm still not sold. I'm sorry. I'm still not sold. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. Somebody help me. Somebody help me get nation pilled. For all in the world, most people out there love their nation, or at least have some affinity for their nation, have some type of allegiance to it. Help me be nation pilled. I can't. I cannot look at definitely the stars and the stripes. Can't look at the stars and the stripes, and I can't look at any other flag, any other system, and say, yo, I want to be a part of that. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm continuing here. Sorry. Let's continue here. Where were we? Are we going back to Ina again? He has another section called Ina. He's still not going to talk about his wife, but he's going to write a whole paragraph about how he loves some Russian boy. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Anyway, I'm going to continue over here. So the entire thrust of the resolution was to prepare the party for any contingency. Whether the rebellion of the Negroes is to be the outcome of a general revolutionary situation in the U.S., whether it is to originate in the whirlpool of decisive fights for power by the working class, for proletarian dictatorship, or whether, on the contrary, the Negro rebellion will be the prelude of gigantic struggles for power by the American proletarian, cannot be foretold now. But in either contingency, it is essential for the Communist Party to make an energetic beginning already now with the organization of joint mass struggles for white and black workers against Negro oppression. This alone will enable us to get rid of the bourgeois white chauvinism, which is polluting the ranks of the white workers of America, to overcome the distrust of the Negro masses, and to win over to our side these millions of Negroes as active fellow fighters in the struggle for the overthrow of bourgeois power throughout America. Beautiful. Once again, beautiful. Now back to Ina, and she won't get mentioned, but let's find out what happened to his non-existent wife. Anyway. My girlfriend goes to another school, yo. All right. The time for my departure was approaching. I thought of Ina and the future of our marriage. Okay, sure, yeah. She had been much in my mind these last days in Moscow as I reflected back on our 3 happy years together. 3 happy years? You gave her 3 sentences, bruh. You gave her 3 sentences, but y'all had 3 happy years. Where? Despite my busy schedule at the school, we managed to spend most weekends together at her mother's apartment on Malaya Bronayaya, a short distance from the school. It was Ina who had introduced me to the cultural life of the Soviet capital. Together, we attended theaters, movies, concerts at the Conservatory of Music, and Moscow ballets and operas at the Bolshoi Theater. We often visited the Park of Culture and Rest, a wooded area across from the Kremlin along the Moscow River. It combined restaurants, theaters, and amusements. Exhibitions of all sorts were held there as well. Other times we went boating on the Moscow River. Aww. Ina had given up her ballet school studies a year or so before. She was now attending the Institute of Foreign Languages, where she was studying English. She displayed a great aptitude for languages, and her English was quite good. After only a year of study, she had begun to read American literature. Though not a member of the Communist Party, she was what they called a non-party social activist. That is, sympathetic to the party and actively supporting its aims of building socialism. If I remember right, he told me the story that Ina's father was killed by the Bolsheviks because he was a rich landowner. So I wouldn't be surprised if she never joined the party. If I remember right. That's what I read. If I'm wrong, put it in the chat. Put it in the chat anyway. As the time of my departure drew near, we earnestly discussed the future of our marriage. We had agreed that it would that it should not be terminated with my departure. Our idea was that we would eventually get Ina to the States. No! 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 Of course, I anticipated some difficulties, but to my mind, they were not insurmountable. For one thing, we were, by mutual choice, unencumbered by children. Ina was a friendly, outgoing person, and I felt she would have little trouble adjusting to a new environment and would be accepted by the black community in any of the big urban centers of the North. I would undoubtedly be assigned to national Afro-American work at the center of New York City on my return. After all, even professional revolutionaries were not homeless itinerants of the old wobbly tradition. Many were married and had families, even in situations where both were full-time professional revolutionaries. So as we saw it, our separation was to be temporary. We agreed that once settled in my future work, perhaps in a year or so, I would either send for Ina or return myself to bring her back to the States. Just before my departure, an incident occurred which forcibly brought home to me the contrast between the socialist world which I was leaving and the racist world which I was about to re-enter. The incident occurred in Stalingrad, one of the new huge manufacturing cities of the Soviet Union. The location was Traktorostroy, a basic unit of the 5-year plan with a capacity of 50,000 tractors a year. The plant stretched 15 miles along the Volga River. They had brought over 350 highly skilled white mechanics from the United States, who, together with their families, formed a small American colony. They had their own restaurants supplied with the best food, tobacco, and wines that the Soviets could furnish. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. Into this situation stepped a lone black toolmaker, Robert Robinson. A native of Jamaica and a naturalized U.S. citizen, Robinson was a graduate of Cass Technical High School in Detroit. He had come to Moscow under a 1-year contract to instruct young Soviet workers in the Stalingrad plant in the art of tool grinding. He had formerly been employed by the Ford Motor Company. On the morning of his arrival in Stalingrad, he was shown into the American dining room. He sat down at a table for breakfast before starting work, where he was immediately insulted, beaten up, and thrown out of the restaurant by 2 of his white American fellow workers. Death to lynchers. They should have killed them. They should have killed them right then and there in the Soviet Union. This attempt to transplant American racism to Soviet soil was met with outrage. It was made a political issue of high order by the Soviet trade unions and party organizations. Factory meetings were called throughout the Soviet Union, which denounced this crime and expressed the outrage of Soviet workers. Sometimes I could not be more proud. Sometimes I could not be more proud. All right. Anyway. Where were we? It was made a political issue of the highest order by the Soviet trade unions and party organizations. Factory meetings were called throughout the Soviet Union, which denounced this crime and expressed the outrage of Soviet workers. They adopted resolutions which were sent to Traktorostroy. The slogan of the day became, "American techniques, yes. American race prejudice, no." It was given the widest publicity. The culprits were arrested immediately, not for assault and battery, but for white chauvinism, racism. Basically, they got arrested for white supremacy, because white chauvinism is the same thing. That's fire. I love it. I love it. We need to make this a crime everywhere. Sir, you're under arrest. What for? For being a white supremacist dickhead. Oh, got you. Not for assault and battery, but for white chauvinism, a social crime, and therefore far more serious than just beating up somebody. You're a white supremacist dickhead, and you will go to the gulag, and you will suffer. You will suffer. You'll get an ice cube stuffed up your ass. A mass public trial with delegations sent from factories all over the country were held. The white technicians were sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, which was commuted to deportation to the United States. Oh, shit. That's not a good punishment. But c'est la vie. Pravda, Izvestia, and all the provincial papers carried editorials summing up the lessons of the trial. In the building up of our industries, they said, we expected many foreign workers to come to the country on contract to help fulfill the 5-year plan. They would inevitably bring with them their prejudices from the capitalist world. This was necessary for the Soviet workers to maintain vigilance against all forms of racism and nationalism, which must be sternly rebuffed. Robinson himself remained in the Soviet Union, where he became a citizen and eventually an engineer. Later, he was a deputy to the Moscow Soviets. I remember the Robinson incident well. At the time it occurred, some of us from the school were in a restaurant. A group of Russians seated near us pointed to us and exchanged comments. You heard about the shameful thing that happened at Tractor Store? Our very presence reminded them of the incident. People were very sympathetic to us. The incident was a dramatic affirmation by Soviet workers of their country's position on the question of race prejudice. Just a few days later, Ina, her mother, students from the school, accompanied me down to the White Russian station, where I entrained for Berlin. From there, after a short stopover, I journeyed to Paris and then embarked at Le Havre for home. The long voyage gave me plenty of time for reflection on my stay in the Soviet Union. I thought of how I would put into practice some of the lessons I learned during my 4.5-year stay there. The initial theoretical framework had been set up. Now began the difficult task of testing it in practice. How would we build a national revolutionary movement of blacks in close alliance with the revolutionary working class movement? What would be the problem in organizing blacks? What resistance to the CI position would I find within the party's ranks? These were but a few of the questions that passed through my mind as I headed home. Beautiful. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. We finished chapter 11. Shout out to everybody who joined the live stream. Shout out to Acting for showing love in the chat. And shout out to everybody else who's going to watch this on the playback. Really fascinating chapter. I'm glad that we're, kind of getting out of Russia. It was a very fascinating, I think his time in Russia took up, like six chapters at least. You get what I'm saying? So that was a long, long time in Russia. I think it was a good decade he was there. And looking forward to seeing what is going to happen now that he has to put it in praxis. You know what I mean? He has to put that theory in praxis. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to continue reading next time. We're going to continue reading next time. We're going to wrap up chapter 12. We're going to do entire chapters in our sittings. And as long as I don't have missing pages, this should be an easy breeze. We have about, I think, 8 more chapters to go, if I remember right. Let's see how many chapters. If we're on chapter 12, we have actually 10 more chapters to go. So we're going to wrap this book up with 10 more readings. There will be 10 more episodes of this book before we move on to the next one. So shout out to everybody who's enjoying this text. And yeah, y'all be easy out there.